Hello, lovely listeners. I am lover woman Les Kami, and I am back with the sixth episode of Thalassophobia. I hope you guys like how the story is progressing so far. Summary in the description as always. Now, without further ado. Part 1, A Son's Plea. Even though she had heard him approaching, Morel didn't think much of it until he actually started to climb up her hill. As she had not spoken to him directly in many years, she could not fathom what business he thought he had with her. Hoping against hope that he was just taking a strange route through the woods, she put a glass of water up to her lips and began to drink. He stopped outside her door. Morel felt a trickle of annoyance, but she'd be lying if she said there wasn't slight intrigue there as well. His culture did not knock. Instead, he loudly said, "Iashio, I politely request your presence." But polite was not how Morel would describe his voice. No, he sounded anxious, fretful even. Morel put her water down and went to open up. She shielded her eyes against the sun and looked upon the young Aquarius known as Alderdray. He was the son of Zalaphine, the elder Aquarius that traversed these woods. Morel once asked Zalaphine what the name Alderdray meant, and was told that its meaning was wisdom of oak. Morel couldn't speak on the wisdom part, but Alderdray was certainly as tall as any oak she had ever seen. When the sun caught his red hair, he looked like a walking torch. His eyes were blue like his mother's, but he had received his father's strong build. Young as he was, he had yet to fill it out, but age would make him a force to be reckoned with. "Yes," Morel said. "It's my father," Alderdray said. "He has been captured and is being held in the human village." Morel's heart skipped several beats. "What?" "He hadn't been home in days." Alderdray began to pace in a circle, his tone both angered and worried. "I asked the trees where he was, and they told me he had been captured by two men. I told my father he shouldn't go out alone in his old age. I told him. Now look what has happened." "No." Zalaphine had always been good to creatures small and large. When Morel was young, he used to carry her on his back and tell her stories of his adventures. Her worries seemed to drift away as easily as the wind while he spoke. Sometimes she'd even fall asleep, his calm voice and gentle gait being far too much for a sleepy child to endure. She'd usually wake in a soft pile of leaves that resided in his homestead, which was little more than a camp within a clearing of the forest. Sometimes Morel would be so tired that she wouldn't wake until Fagin or one of her friends came to get her. Zalaphine truly was the kindest of creatures. He was one of the very few that didn't treat Morel differently for abandoning the role of Iashio. The thought of him being tied and dragged anywhere filled Morel with fury. Her fists balled at her sides, her claws cutting into the flesh on her hands. Unlike his father, Alderdray could not read thoughts directly, but he could get the gist of what was going on in someone's head. He was evidently pleased at Morel's anger. He stopped pacing and took a tall stance while addressing her. "My father has always had faith in you. Iashio, I am asking you to prove him right and help me save him. The humans get bolder every day. Let this be the final straw. Demonkind will stand by your side if you decide to fulfill the prophecy today." "Today?" Morel repeated. "You expect me to throw our kind into war on a whim?" He stomped angrily. Morel twitched at the disrespect. "A whim?" he said in a seething voice. "It has been almost 2 decades of you cowering away from that which you were born for. When will enough be enough? Watch your tongue." Some of his pride faltered and made way for wariness. "I mean no disrespect," he said in a begrudging tone. "I just can't comprehend why you hide here when you are destined for such greatness. If I was born Iyashio, you weren't, Morel interrupted. She walked towards him, and he stepped back with every step she took, looking startled. If that's why you're here, to tell me how much of a better hero you'd be, I suggest you wait till nightfall and take it up with the stars. She backed him up to the edge of the hill, his back hooves making rocks fall. He looked down behind him in the direction that was the quickest way to the humans. After a long moment, he turned back to Morel with a fire in his eyes that surprised her. You're willing to rebuke me for saying something against you, but the humans conduct themselves like they own this forest and you let them. What sense does that make? I don't need to explain myself to you, Morel said, her teeth bared. You're nothing but a child. And you, he said, drawing himself up, are a coward. With that, he whinnied angrily and galloped down the hill. Morel watched him go and let out a troubled breath once he was out of her sight. She walked back inside her cabin, closed the door, and pressed her forehead against it. This was not good. It was bad enough that what had happened to Fagin caused a considerable stir. Thankfully, Tamari, his wife, was able to quell it well enough that the demons didn't do anything stupid. But this would not go over easy. Fagin may be respected and revered, but Zalaphine was loved deeply by many in the forest. Morel's claws left marks in the door from how hard she tensed her hand. She wanted to do something. She had to. But a memory of torches, being dragged up a cliff, a fall that seemed endless, water in place of air. Morel peeled herself away from her door and went to sit at her table. Her breath came shallow and labored as she fought to pull herself from her memories. Zalaphine's smile flashed behind her eyes. Him doing small magic tricks to amuse her. Him telling her that she carried a large burden for one so young. Him saying that he believed in her, that she would be great, that she was capable of more than her thoughts told her. She closed her eyes and said, "I'm sorry," into the silence of her cabin. Part 2. Here's to Making New Friends. It had been 2 days since the Aquarius had been captured. Lightwood had him tied up in his front yard. While there was a fence enclosing it, Vitala was absolutely certain that the Aquarius could make the jump if only he wasn't bound so tightly. His restraints were ropes that looked painfully tight around his body, arms, and legs, making it so he could hardly move more than a few inches past the tree he was bound to. In the days following his capture, people had gathered to gawk at him. Children threw sticks to get him to move for their entertainment, but he didn't rise to the taunting. In fact, he was so subdued that Vitala wondered if he had tried to escape a single time since his capture. She wanted to speak to him. She knew they could have a completely silent conversation in which they spoke through their minds alone, but he required his eyes to do so, and Blightwood had left those blindfolded. Speaking of Blightwood, his plans for the Aquarius became widely known in a short space of time. After all, if you're going to keep a demon in town, people would naturally have questions as to why, and boy, did Blightwood have answers. The good news was that he was not planning on killing the Aquarius. The bad news was that killing him might have been kinder than the actual plan of keeping him alive to use his blood to enhance the effects of common medicine. Blightwood had bought medicines in bulk and infused them with the magical blood that ran in the Aquarius's veins. Many in Reveldad turned their noses up at ingesting such a substance, but the ones who didn't were willing to pay a pretty penny for the enhanced medicinal properties. Vitala thought no one in Reveldad would want to ingest demon blood, but it seemed that there was a subset of people that were fine with demons that were being used for humanity's benefit. These people gathered around to get their hands on medicines that healed old scars, closed wounds, and soothed aches. Blightwood only sold his product in small doses. If you wanted long-term effects, you had to buy a fair amount. Blightwood had already made a decent amount of money in the short time the Aquarius had been in town, and it pained Vitala to see the fresh cuts on him every time she went to visit. It was absolute misery to see the awful state something so beautiful was in, but Vitala couldn't help the urge to visit multiple times a day. In fact, she checked on the Aquarius so often that Blightwood had joked that he'd need to charge her a viewing fee if she was just going to stand there and not buy anything. The Aquarius's imprisonment weighed so heavily on Vitala's mind that she found it impossible to enjoy what was undoubtedly her biggest achievement in Reveldad so far: getting a job. Elijah and Jimena were so enthused about the fact Vitala had agreed to join their team that they mentioned it to all their clients. As a result, news spread that the foreign woman was set to start caring for Reveldad's horses. Matthias, Saren, and Elias actually came to personally congratulate her at Elaine's inn. Under normal circumstances, all of this would have made Vitala more elated than she knew what to do with. Was getting a job somewhere not a sure sign of residence, of belonging? Was it not a good thing that the people of Reveldad were speaking happily about having someone around who could provide care they thus far lacked? If Vitala's mind was not so preoccupied with the Aquarius, her answers to these questions would be a resounding yes. However, all she had spent the last 2 days thinking about was how she had to do something. She wanted to free the Aquarius, but that was out of the question. Call it wishful thinking, but she wondered if Morel and the other demons would band together to come save one of their own. While the thought of a rescue mission made Vitala's heart feel considerably lighter, she would be lying if she said she wasn't concerned about the possibility of casualties. There had been no attacks made by demons since Vitala had come to Reveldad, but would that hold throughout this situation? The one and only thing that managed to put Vitala's mind off the Aquarius was Elaine telling her that there was a package for her. "I would have slid it under your door, but it was too big." Vitala, having no doubt who the parcel was from, thanked Elaine and retreated to her bedroom. The name Nicholas Stone was scrawled on the small box, and just looking at it was enough to make Vitala smile for the first time in days. She climbed on her bed and tore open the seal. A folded letter was pinned under a small glass jar containing something brown. Vitala picked the jar up and examined it. There was a piece of twine tied underneath the lid, with a scrap of paper attached to it that read, "Here's to making new friends." It was these words that let Vitala know that the substance in the jar was peanut butter. She set it aside on her bedside table, picked up the letter that had been underneath it, and began to read. "Tally, I am so pleased to hear from you. When I got your letter, I was so excited that I ended up tearing it upon opening. I admit I was worried. I know you don't want me to be, but I'm your father and will always be worried about my baby girl. You being so close to demons has not exactly been helping me sleep at night, but it sounds like you're keeping yourself safe. I must say that the tone of your letter fills me with joy. I can't remember the last time you sounded so happy and full of hope. Maybe when you first told me you wanted to go to Reveldad. You've idolized that place for years, and I'm glad it's living up to what you want. Yes, I do worry for you, but that is my cross to bear. You go live your life and don't fret over this old man. All I hope is that you don't forget about me so deeply that you never update me on your life. Even though you are grown, I very much want to be a part of your world still. So tell me, how have you been since you last wrote? Are you happy? Are you eating? Did you get a job? When it comes to my life, I'm afraid I've become a boring old man. I spend my days feeding the birds, whittling, and knitting. Cornelia still thinks I should get more masculine hobbies." Vitala frowned at the mention of her mother. "But the ones I have keep me busy and happy. She won't say it, but I think she misses you. Next time you send a letter, do send her one as well. Even if she doesn't say it, she'd love to hear from you. With care, your loving father. P.S. You may have noticed I put a good luck charm in the package. I figured there was no harm in sending it, even though I'm not quite sure you remember its significance as you were quite young." How could Vitala ever forget? "Dad," an 8-year-old Vitala had said, "can you help me make some peanut butter cookies?" "What?" Nicholas blinked. "But, I know, but some girls were talking about how those are their favorite. Maybe if I bring some tomorrow, we can be friends." Nicholas opened and closed his mouth. Vitala gave him her best pleading look, and he folded with a sigh of, "Okay." So the two of them got to work. Nicholas used a recipe he had gotten from his grandmother, and they spent the better part of the evening trying to follow it to perfection. Laughter and messes born from play filled the kitchen as much as the light flickering in through the windows did. Vitala started getting excited when the cookies started to give off a delicious smell. Once they were officially finished, Nicholas broke off half of one and handed part to Cornelia. Vitala held her breath as she watched them try it. Nicholas made a loud, "Mmm," but the thing that convinced Vitala the most was Cornelia looking impressed. "Yes," Vitala said with a hop. "Here's to making new friends." Nicholas laughed and put the remaining cookies in a container for Vitala to take with her tomorrow. She carried the container around with her all day as she fantasized about how great the next day would be. She never tried any of the cookies herself. She was allergic to peanut butter. Vitala clutched the small jar tighter than necessary. Her father had sent it as a sort of good luck charm meant to aid in making friends in Reveldad, a desire she was currently at odds with. How could she look past Reveldad's hatred for demons? She had tried to close her heart, but the Aquarius's capture made it burst open more passionately than before. How would she close it again? She thought of Matthias. He was so kind, and undoubtedly the person Vitala had grown closest to, and his heart had no space for demons. She hated to admit it, but a part of her very seriously envied him for this. Not only that, but even her father was warning her to stay away from these creatures she found so fascinating. To her knowledge, he had no reason to distrust them, but he clearly did. Vitala believed in her father's judgment, and thus would be lying if she said his warnings meant absolutely nothing to her. She wanted to heed him. She wanted to be able to say that she was as unbothered as anyone else at how demons got treated in Reveldad. The thing was, she knew that she didn't belong with the demons. She knew they probably wouldn't want her camaraderie. The grand majority of them had no idea she existed, and probably wouldn't take kindly to a random woman inserting herself into their business. But she also knew exactly what it was like to be othered. She had never been beaten in front of a crowd like Foggin had, but she'd been called names and likened to something evil many times. She wondered how many people in Reveldad could say the same. The thing was, she liked that they couldn't say the same. She liked that people were surprised at the mistreatment she faced in the South for being what she was. But that also meant they were unrelatable in that regard, while the demons were not. How it was possible for one person to be split in two so severely was a mystery to Vitala. She agonized over her feelings until a distraction came by way of a commotion that could be heard from her window. She got out of bed and made her way over to see if she could figure out what was going on. Even though she couldn't see anything, there was only one possible place that could have enough people necessary to cause that much noise. Something was happening in the town square. Part 3. The Warning. Vitala ordered Porkchop to stay put as she rushed downstairs. Elaine was at the front desk, looking towards the doors with a curious expression. She had obviously heard the commotion too. She looked at Vitala and received a sort of, "your guess is as good as mine" look. "Be careful," Elaine said as Vitala walked past her to the doors. Vitala nodded and left. The closer she got to the town square, the more her instincts told her to turn back. The audible commotion carried a tone of fear. Vitala fought against the intimidation she felt and pushed forward until she came face to face with what was causing the stir. Her mouth fell open at the stunning beauty before her. A young Aquarius with red hair and blue eyes stood in the middle of the square. Even though Vitala was standing at the very back of the crowd that had circled him, he was easily visible with how tall he was. His horse half was a shiny brown that spoke to him being very well taken care of, and he looked incredibly regal with his proud stance and purposeful gaze. "What's going on?" Vitala asked a man standing next to her. "He wants to speak to Krona," he said in a voice that was both indignant and disquieted. "Someone went to go get her." In the moments it took for Krona to arrive, Vitala couldn't help but watch the young Aquarius. His size could not be overstated. He easily cleared the heads of everyone in the crowd. He tried to hide it, but being around this many humans was evidently making him antsy. His eyes flickered along the crowd as if to make sure nobody was going to try anything. When Krona arrived, Vitala saw that she was carrying her knife with the golden hilt. It seemed that she had already decided how this interaction was going to go. "Speak," Krona said to the Aquarius in a commanding tone. There wasn't a trace of her usual charm. Her eyes were hard and blazing, her lips drawn into a scowl. "My father," the Aquarius said. "Release him." Krona raised her eyebrows. That sounded like a command. "It is a warning." The crowd broke out into a murmur. It seemed many had an issue with Krona being spoken to like that. Krona, however, did not look like she was nervous about that warning at all. "A warning?" She laughed. "Tell me, would you take lightly to one of your own being captured and held in the forest? My father is older than these trees. He knows the names of every creature in that forest and is loved by many. Release him, and the demons need not know what you have done. Nights have been safe for you for a while. Do you truly wish to see that end?" The crowd's reaction to this ranged from outraged to terrified. Some in the crowd shouted profanities at the Aquarius for his threats. Vitala felt a begrudging respect for Krona for not looking the least bit fazed. "You're bold to come here by yourself," she said. "What makes you think you can walk into our town, demand to see me, threaten us, and walk away unscathed?" The young Aquarius puffed out his chest. "I have come here with the desire for peace in my heart. Surely even you—" But whatever Krona surely was, Vitala didn't find out. The young Aquarius's nostrils flared and his eyes widened. His attention snapped to a woman in the crowd. "What is that?" he asked suddenly. The woman was noticeably startled. She took a step back, but not before reflexively opening her hand to reveal what she was holding. It was one of Blightwood's vials. Horror struck the young Aquarius's face as he realized what must be happening to his father. Absolute fury followed a moment later, and he reared up on his hooves with a powerful whinny. He charged at the woman holding the vial. Krona's reaction time was a marvel. She put herself between the woman and the raging Aquarius and put her arms up in a bracing position. The Aquarius's front hooves came down on her, scraping across her face and landing on her chest, so she shot backwards, knocking over 3 people in the crowd and landing on the ground with a loud bang. Those nearest rushed to see if the 3 people that had been hit and Krona were okay. Though the 3 looked concussed, at least they were moving. Krona was not so lucky. She was completely immobile and bleeding so badly from her face that blood was pooling onto the ground. The damage to the hero sent the crowd into a frenzy. Men and women charged the Aquarius, grabbing at his hooves and tail. The Aquarius clearly did not think his attack through, because he seemed completely blindsided by the amount of people who were currently rushing him. Vitala saw a mixture of shock and fear on his face as he was eventually brought to the ground by the crowd. "Don't kill him." Krona had gotten to her feet. She used her ripped clothing to wet the blood off her face, and Vitala saw there were no wounds to speak of. It seemed impossible that she had suffered such a large blow just a moment ago. Her eyes burned with fury, and the remnants of blood on her face made her look slightly crazed. She approached the Aquarius, who was putting up a useless struggle against the people who had him pinned on his side. Vitala realized at some point Krona had unsheathed her knife. Krona lifted her blade and Vitala shut her eyes. There were two loud, wet sounds, and the Aquarius let out an agonized cry that was a mixture of a man screaming and a horse neighing. Vitala's eyes were squeezed shut so tightly that color burst behind them. "Go back into your forest." Krona's voice rang in Vitala's ears. "Tell the demons whatever you want to tell them. We in Reveldad are done being threatened by your kind. The only reason I'm sparing your life is because I want those monsters to see what happens when they decide humans are to be messed with." Vitala opened her eyes at the revelation that the Aquarius had not been killed. However, when she realized what those two wet sounds had been, she felt bile rise in her throat. Krona had stabbed his eyes out. "Let it up," Krona commanded the people surrounding him. The people did as told, and the young Aquarius shakily stood to his feet. He stumbled, and some in the crowd laughed at him. The holes that adorned where his eyes had been were oozing with blood that splattered onto the ground. Vitala thought he would say something, but he didn't. His lips curled into a pained snarl, and then he was off, galloping lopsided into the woods, stumbling again as he hit a few trees. Silence hung in the air for a moment. Krona was breathing rather heavily. Vitala was certain that she had died when the Aquarius hit her. At the very least, the impact definitely cracked her skull. What was it like to come back from that? Krona pulled at her ripped shirt, a smirk crossing her face. "Man, I really like this shirt." The crowd laughed. The people closest to her patted her on the back, giving her a playful jostle. Vitala grimaced. How could they all act like what had happened wasn't awful? Vitala's head snapped to her right, where an old woman who looked absolutely infuriated was pushing her way to the front of the crowd so Krona could see her. "You and the rest of this town get worse by the day. All that child wanted was his father back." "Watch how you speak to Krona," said a male voice that Vitala could not pinpoint. The old woman paid him no mind and continued to address Krona. "Someone needs to say it, and I'm too old to give a damn. Didn't you hear what the boy said? We just invited another spat with the demons." "We can handle it," said Krona, looking surprisingly unfazed by the old lady's outburst. Vitala wondered if this was the old woman who sold meat that Morel had once mentioned. "We shouldn't have to handle it," said the woman. "Why do we insist on living our lives like this? We could have peace." "You remain a mystery to me. You were a nurse for many, many years. How many people came to you with injuries born from demons wanting peace?" "I don't regret my service to the people in Reveldad, but we started this unrest. Of course the demons would defend themselves. I don't blame them." "You sound more and more like a prophetic traitor every day," a woman in the crowd said. There was a murmur of agreement. "You want to speak of the prophecy?" the old woman said. "Fine. When will any of you acknowledge that Krona hasn't won yet? Iashio is still alive and well." "I don't know if I'd describe her as well," Krona said with laughter. "You think that scrawny mutt has a chance against me? Is that it? Well, why don't you kill her then?" There was a hush amongst the crowd. Vitala got the feeling that this was a question many wondered about but didn't have the gall to say. Krona's face fell for the briefest of moments, but she quickly recovered and said, "Keeping her around is a great way to weed out whose faith is shaky and fickle. If you think demons are harmless, then go join them in the woods." The old woman glared at Krona, but remained silent and still. "I thought as much," Krona said with a slight sneer. She addressed the crowd at large by saying, "I see no reason for us to fret. Are we not Reveldadians? If that beast or any others in that forest want to pick a battle, they will find worthy opponents with us." Krona threw up her hands and the crowd cheered. Vitala felt fear, the likes of which she had only felt a few times before in her entire life. If the Aquarius made good on his promise, was she prepared to defend herself? She had never been much of a fighter. What was the likelihood of her being hurt? Would staying inside keep her safe? If so, how long would she have to fear going out at night? This was so ridiculous. All that needed to be done was for Blightwood to release the Aquarius he had stolen. Why couldn't everyone see how simple avoiding this conflict would be? Vitala felt as though she was missing a large piece of the puzzle that explained why the people in Reveldad behaved how they did. Surely they didn't want a war with the demons, did they? Hating something and actively wanting to fight with them were two different things. What was Vitala missing? She needed to talk to someone. These feelings were driving her crazy. But who? Who could she talk to honestly while simultaneously knowing they wouldn't judge her? Her father had made his stance clear. He wanted her away from demons too. Matthias had also made his feelings clear. In thinking about Matthias, Vitala remembered Saren and how he once expressed feeling bad for Morel. Even though he had formed a life with his husband and children in Reveldad, he still had sympathy for the wolf in the woods. How did he do it? Vitala made up her mind right then and there as the crowd began to disperse. Next time she got a private moment with Saren, she would ask him how he was able to have empathy for demons while simultaneously being happy in town. She didn't think she'd ever be able to fully shut her heart to the demons, nor did she think she wanted to completely jump ship and become a prophetic traitor. But maybe, just maybe, she could find a content middle. That is all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening.